I want you to imagine, just for a second, the ultimate, logical, soulless machine.
Right, the classic sci-fi trope.
Exactly. You are probably picturing a metallic entity that just, doesn't feel fear.
Doesn't feel pity either.
Yeah, and it just marches forward with this absolute mathematical precision. It calculates trajectories, assesses threats, and, well, eliminates them with zero emotion.
A completely sanitized approach to warfare.
Totally. That is the standard image of a killing machine. And frankly, it's the default assumption most people make when analyzing the Necrons. But today, we are going to completely shatter that image.
We really are.
I want you to take that cold, calculating, perfectly rational automaton and just throw it out the airlock.
Good riddance.
Right. Imagine instead a machine that is completely, hopelessly addicted to the sight of spilling organic blood.
It's wild, and it fundamentally upends how we analyze their overarching strategy.
It really does.
Because when we look at the source material today, these excerpts from the text, Crimson Rituals, the Bloodthirsty Legacy of the Novokh Dynasty, we are forced to confront a really uncomfortable reality about their cognitive architecture.
Right, because this text challenges the whole prevailing theory, doesn't it?
Absolutely. The assumption was always that the biotransference process resulted in this uniform race of cold, calculating strategists.
Just metal skeletons doing math.
Exactly. But the Novokh dynasty proves that engrammatic corruption didn't just cause memory loss. In some cases, it preserved and actually amplified the most horrific, savage impulses of their mortal past.
Which is terrifying.
They operate as the galaxy's blood-hungry melee executioners.
Okay, let's unpack this, because our mission for this deep dive is to figure out exactly how these incredibly advanced, seemingly robotic beings became so fundamentally twisted by a primitive history.
It's quite the journey.
It really is. I mean, to understand why a hyper-advanced dimension-skipping metallic civilization acts like feral butchers on the battlefield, we have to look backward. We have to look at the organic flesh they used to inhabit.
Right. Millions of years ago, long before the Cetan ever arrived on the scene.
So what was that organic flesh like?
Well, the Crimson Rituals text dwells heavily on their pre-biotransference history for this exact reason. The identity of the Novokh dynasty was forged during their organic epoch.
So they weren't just standard soldiers back then.
Not at all. They were not merely a warlike culture within the broader Necrontyr Empire. The Novokh were, well, they were notorious for these elaborate, deeply primitive blood rituals.
Rituals that basically ran their whole society.
Precisely. It dictated their entire societal hierarchy and their military ethos. They viewed warfare not as a political tool, but as a religious canvas.
A canvas. That's a great way to put it, because the excerpts describe this terrifying practice where their organic warriors would actually daub their faces and arms in the blood of the enemies they had just vanquished.
A literal coat of paint.
Yeah. They treated their own bodies as a living canvas of their victories. But what strikes me, and this is where I get a bit hung up, is the cognitive dissonance of it all today.
How so?
Well, if they don't have souls or flesh anymore, I mean, if they literally lack the sensory apparatus to feel wet blood on skin, why do they still care about the visual aesthetic of it?
That is the million-dollar question.
Like, does the paint serve a tangible psychological purpose, or is it just leftover corrupted programming operating in some kind of endless loop?
What's fascinating here is the concept of cultural memory outlasting biological life.
Yeah.
And the mechanics of how that transition occurred.
Right.
When the Novokh underwent biotransference, their consciousness was digitized into engrams.
They're digital brains, basically.
Essentially, yes.
Yeah.
But the engrammatic architecture isn't just a hard drive storing memories, it's a foundational operating system.
Okay.
For the Novokh, the physical act of smearing blood was so intrinsic to their identity that it became deeply encoded into their core personality matrices.
So it's baked right into the code.
Exactly. The crimson paint you see on their modern metallic carapaces isn't merely decorative. It is a rigid monument to a lost organic sensation.
Oh, wow.
It acts as a visual anchor that keeps their engrams from fully dissociating. The psychological architecture of their glory days was perfectly preserved.
But without the biology to back it up.
Right, without the biological feedback loop, they rely on the aesthetic mimicry of their crimson livery to stabilize their digital minds.
That feels almost like, well, it's like a localized phantom limb syndrome.
That's a really good analogy.
but scaled up to an entire civilization.
Yeah.
Like the limb in this case is the biological ability to feel a ritualistic high, and they are painting themselves red to soothe the digital ghost of that sensation. It's like a haunted house where the house is an advanced robotic exoskeleton, and the ghost is just the memory of a primitive butcher.
That captures the tragedy of it perfectly. And the text also points to their dynasty's glyph to reinforce this.
Oh yeah, the glyph. It's 6 wars of conquest spreading outward from its core.
Right. Exactly. The glyph is a perfect macro representation of that internal state. It reflects an aggressive, expansionist identity that was so foundational, so inextricably linked to their sense of self, that it was hard-coded into their new metal forms.
It's all connected.
It is. The aesthetic, both the crimson livery and the aggressive geometry of their glyph, is the outward manifestation of an unresolvable tension between their digital reality and their organic memories.
And the source material makes it clear that this tension isn't just cosmetic either.
Not at all.
This obsession with blood actively alters them in the field. Like the text reveals that the actual visual sight of organic blood drastically alters their mechanical biology in real time.
Which shouldn't be physically possible.
Right. It's not a preference, it's a violent systemic reaction.
The physical and psychological shift on the battlefield is profound. The text paints a very clear before and after picture of Novokh deployments.
Walk us through that. What does a deployment look like at first?
Initially, a Novokh phalanx marches in the standard, terrifying lockstep we associate with their race.
Slow, plodding, mathematically perfect formations.
Exactly. Their optical sensors glow with a low, dormant energy. It's very restrained. But the moment the battle begins and the first wave of organic enemies is engaged, the paradigm shifts entirely.
It all just breaks down.
Totally.
The moment the gore of their organic foes splashes across their metal carapaces, everything activates.
Yes.
The text explains that the engrams holding the memories of those ancient blood rituals are triggered. These engrams completely override their standard operational systems and plunge them into an unstoppable killing frenzy.
It's a complete system hijack.
But I'm trying to grasp the actual mechanism here. I mean, how does a soulless machine get high on blood?
It requires looking at how visual stimuli interact with their necrodermis.
Yeah.
As you said, they have absolutely no biological receptors left.
Right.
No dopamine, no adrenaline, no nervous system to process chemical changes. Yet their optical sensors are intrinsically linked to their engrammatic core.
Their cameras are wired directly to their brains.
Exactly. Yeah. So when they register the specific chromatic and viscous properties of organic blood splashing across their bodies.
The exact color and stickiness of it.
Yes, the specific physical properties. It triggers a catastrophic recursive loop within their engrams.
Oh, wow.
The memory of the ancient blood ritual is so potent that the digitized mind essentially hallucinates the biological euphoria of their past.
It hallucinates.
It does. The engrams flood their synthetic synaptic pathways with hyper-accelerated combat subroutines, perfectly simulating a chemical high.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because it operates exactly like ancient, corrupted malware.
That's a great way to think about it.
Imagine a foundational code written millions of years ago that just sits dormant in a system's BIOS, and it suddenly, forcefully executes the exact moment a specific sensory input is detected by the optics.
Just a cascading system failure that looks like a berserker charge.
But this raises a major question about their intent for me. Are they actively processing this gore for any sort of physical fuel? Or are they entirely trapped in a psychological glitch that makes them think they need it?
The source material indicates it is almost entirely a psychological glitch.
Really?
Yes, but one with devastating physical outputs. When that engrammatic malware executes, it actually alters the power distribution within their living metal bodies.
So they get stronger.
They fight with an unnatural twitching vigor that defies standard tactical parameters.
Twitching. That's a creepy word for a robot.
It is, because it's so chaotic. They aren't drinking the blood for sustenance. They're acting out a ritualistic memory that forces their internal reactors to run hot.
Pushing their engines into the red.
Precisely. It grants them a terrifying burst of kinetic energy. And crucially, this brutal power spike is uncontrollable.
They can't just switch it off when the battle is won.
No. The text notes they do not stop until all organic foes have been completely annihilated. The visual stimulus must be eradicated for the system to reset. The frenzy simply cannot be switched off until the source of the stimulus, the living, bleeding enemy, is entirely removed from their optical range.
Which perfectly explains why their entire approach to war is so skewed compared to other dynasties.
It's completely different.
Because of this deeply ingrained engrammatic malware, the Novokh dynasty has completely abandoned standard logical military doctrine. The text delves into how they've designed their entire society and their armory around tools that guarantee they trigger this frenzy as quickly as possible.
The deviation from the standard operational doctrine is stark. I mean, the vast majority of their kin rely on strategic positioning, calculated maneuvers, and overwhelming long-range firepower.
Sniping and artillery.
Right, a methodical, sanitized approach to extermination. The Novokh, conversely, specialize almost exclusively in hyper-aggressive close combat.
They just want to get in your face.
They do. They deploy disproportionate numbers of Lich Guard and Destroyer cultists. Their entire strategic objective is to close the distance and engage in melee, simply overwhelming their enemies in a crush of bladed limbs.
Right, because you can't trigger a narcotic visual high if you are atomizing someone from 2 miles away with a Gauss weapon.
Exactly. There's no blood in atomization.
You need to be in the splash zone. And I noticed the source text highlights how this lore translates directly into their tabletop rules in Warhammer 40,000.
It's a fantastic synergy.
It really is. Their specific blood-hungry rules make their melee attacks mathematically devastating, giving them unique advantages the moment they declare a charge. It's a great example of narrative mechanics informing game mechanics.
Definitely.
But I want to pivot to the armory for a second, specifically a weapon that seems to be the ultimate expression of this madness. The text keeps referencing the blood scythe.
Yes, the blood scythe.
It sounds like a blunt instrument, just a big farming tool, but the mechanics behind it seem far more sinister.
The blood scythe is a terrifying triumph of metallurgical engineering twisted by psychosis.
That is quite the description.
It earns it.
Yeah.
The text details that these weapons are forged from a specific material it calls sanguiphagic star metal alloys.
Sanguiphagic. That translates to blood-eating, right?
Exactly. Blood-eating. This isn't just a sharp blade. The edge of the scythe is engineered on a molecular level to induce rapid exsanguination.
How does that actually work, though? I mean, if it's star metal, is it drawing the blood through magnetic attraction, or is it something more esoteric? The source says a single cut draws a torrent of blood that actively feeds the wielder's frenzy.
It operates through a combination of physical and gravitational forces. There's a capillary action within the microfractures of the blade itself.
So it pulls the fluid into the metal.
Yes, and it combines that with a localized gravitational disruption tailored specifically to the iron or equivalent heavy metals in the target's bloodstream.
That is insane.
When the blade breaches organic tissue, the sanguiphagic alloy actively pulls the fluid out of the wound. It atomizes it upon the surface of the weapon and directs the spray directly backward onto the wielder's carapace.
Oh my God. So it's spraying the user on purpose?
Yes. It is a perpetual motion machine powered by slaughter.
That is just... Wow.
The weapon is designed to draw a massive amount of blood, which splashes onto the optical sensors and chassis.
Which triggers the malware.
Exactly. It triggers the engrammatic recursive loop we discussed earlier, which fuels the wild aggression required to swing the weapon again with even greater velocity.
That is a staggering rejection of efficiency. I mean, they are deliberately engineering weapons not to kill quickly, but to kill messily.
Messy is the goal.
It's like designing a high-end, super expensive computing system specifically to overheat itself just because the user enjoys the sound of the cooling fan spinning at maximum RPM.
Or like a sports car designed to crash just so you can hear the glass break.
Yes, exactly. You are fighting an enemy that actively benefits from the collateral mess of the combat.
It must be terrifying to face.
Imagine realizing you aren't fighting soldiers, but a tidal wave of living blenders that only get faster the more they get hit.
Nightmare fuel.
Seriously. And to field an army this unhinged standard leadership paradigms just wouldn't work.
They'd fall apart.
The source material introduces us to the commander of this nightmare, Farron Galmach, and his title alone sets the stage: the Moon Killer.
Farron Galmach's tactical history provides vital context for the Novokh mindset. He earned the title of Moon Killer long before the Great Sleep.
Okay, so this is ancient history for them.
Right. His methodology for dealing with defiant worlds was brutally theatrical. Rather than engaging in prolonged planetary sieges or orbital bombardments of population centers, he focused his devastating naval assets on the celestial bodies orbiting the defiant world.
He destroyed their
He
moons.
destroyed their moons.
The text mentions this, but I really want to dig into the physics and the psychology of that decision. Why a moon? I mean, why not just glass the planet and be done with it?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, destroying a moon is a masterclass in psychological warfare and ecological torture.
How so?
Wiping out a moon fundamentally alters the gravitational tides of the planet below.
Oh, right. The oceans would go crazy.
Exactly. It causes immediate catastrophic tectonic shifts. Mega tsunamis wipe out coastal infrastructure, the planet's rotation destabilizes, and the atmospheric climate enters a rapid, chaotic collapse.
So you don't even have to fire a shot at the planet itself.
No, it is a slow, agonizing generational death sentence for the entire world. But more importantly, it is a statement of supreme hubris. Galmuk didn't just want to defeat his enemies. He wanted them to watch the sky fall and suffer the slow decay of their world, knowing it was a consequence of their defiance.
That is incredibly petty.
It is, and this is the entity commanding the dynasty from the crown world of Dul VI. He views destruction not as a means to an end, but as a dominant art form.
Which perfectly explains his choice of superweapons, because if destroying a moon is his idea of a flex, the ultimate weapon at his disposal makes a terrifying kind of sense.
The Crimson God.
The text brings up the Crimson God, yeah. Now, the Crimson God is an enslaved Cetan shard.
A fragment of a star god.
Right, but the source explicitly describes this particular shard as unreliable. It rarely acts in the way Galmuk or his cryptex actually wish.
Which is dangerous.
Extremely. Why rely on a weapon that is actively fighting your control?
The deployment of the Crimson God highlights a fascinating deviation from standard logic. In most dynasties, Cetan shards are heavily shackled by tesseract labyrinths and multidimensional control yokes.
Locked down tight.
Very tight. They are beings of pure physical law forced into servitude, and keeping them contained requires absolute cold precision.
Which the Novokh do not have.
Exactly. The Novokh lack that rigid, dispassionate control. Their own engrammatic frenzy makes their containment protocols inherently unstable.
They're too angry to focus on the locks.
Basically, yes. The Crimson God is unreliable because the Novokh's thirst for sheer, unadulterated carnage constantly tempts them to loosen the shackles just a fraction too much, hoping for a wider blast radius.
They just want a bigger explosion.
They prioritize the volume of destruction over the precision of the strike.
So it's less about tactical deployment and more about just weaponizing chaos?
Yes.
But does Galmuk actually exercise strategic control over these frenzied warriors and this volatile Cetan shard? Or is he essentially just establishing a directional vector and letting the madness run its course?
That's a great distinction.
Because reading the text, it sounds less like a military campaign and more like a contained natural disaster being aimed at a target.
The source material heavily implies the latter. Galmuk isn't conducting a precise symphony, he is erecting a catastrophic flood.
Just opening the floodgates.
He understands that once the Novokh warriors cross a certain threshold of bloodshed, command and control simply evaporate.
A malware takes over.
Exactly.
Yeah.
His genius, if you can call it that, lies in recognizing the inevitability of the frenzy and positioning his forces so that the resulting engrammatic meltdown occurs exactly where it will cause the maximum amount of damage to the enemy structure.
He points the rabid dog at the enemy and takes off the leash.
That's it, exactly. And as we examine the text detailing their current post-awakening campaigns, we see this doctrine being tested across multiple war zones against incredibly diverse and horrifying foes.
Let's get into those campaigns, because the source material breaks down several multi-front wars, and the implications are staggering.
They are everywhere right now.
Let's start with the Pariah Nexus. The Novokh were deployed into this zone by the Silent King.
A high honor.
Sure, but the text notes a serious internal conflict here. Their brutality in the Nexus is so extreme that the Technomandrites are actually questioning the wisdom of using them.
Which says a lot, given how ruthless the Technomandrites are.
Exactly. And there is one specific chilling detail here. The Novokh aren't just wiping out human settlements, they are actively capturing populations.
This raises an important question that really challenges our earlier assessment.
Yeah, I thought they were just mindless berserkers.
We all did. Up until this point, we've analyzed their bloodlust as a reactive glitch, a loss of control triggered by the heat of battle and visual stimuli.
Right. See blood go crazy.
But capturing live populations to ensure a steady supply of victims for future blood rituals requires complex logistical planning.
It takes infrastructure.
It requires restraint and chilling, methodical premeditation. It proves that the madness isn't solely a localized battlefield phenomenon.
It's way worse.
It is metastasized into their grand strategic planning. They are constructing a logistical pipeline to farm organic life.
Farming people.
Yes, the technomandrites, who operate on pure, unsentimental logic, view this as deeply inefficient and dangerous.
Because they're off mission.
Exactly. They recognize that the Novokh are prioritizing the feeding of their engrammatic addiction over the actual strategic goals of the pariah nexus.
It's industrial-scale serial killer logic. They aren't securing a sector, they're stocking a pantry.
A very grim pantry.
And if that wasn't grim enough, the text moves on to their operations within the Imperium Nihilus.
Ah, yes. The dark side of the rift.
With the galaxy fractured by the Great Rift, the Novokh are engaged in a massive, grinding three-way war. They are fighting the remnants of the human Imperium, massive migratory fleets of orcs, and the chaotic incursions pouring out of the rift.
The sheer volume of conflict in the Imperium Nihilus is exactly what the Novokh required to sustain their operations.
It's an all-you-can-eat buffet.
It really is. Orcs, in particular, provide a massive, resilient, and highly biological enemy that thrives on close-quarters combat.
They love melee as much as the Novokh do.
The Novokh engagements against orcs are described as apocalyptic meat grinders, where the hyper-aggressive momentum of the orcs clashes directly with the engrammatic frenzy of the Novokh.
Unstoppable force meets immovable object, but with chainsaws.
Pretty much. It is a perpetual cycle of butchery that perfectly feeds the sanguophagic mechanics of their weaponry.
But the text presents a third campaign that completely changes the sensory dynamic. Hive Fleet Arachne.
The Tyranids.
The Novokh are locked in a war against the Tyranids. Now, fighting a Tyranid hive fleet is a nightmare of attrition for anyone, because you aren't fighting an army with morale or supply lines.
No, you're fighting a unified biological swarm of endless alien flesh.
Exactly. But for the Novokh, who are physically triggered into a narcotic high by the sight of organic gore, how does that even work?
The interaction between Novokh engrams and Tyranid biomass is a fascinating area of speculation based on the text.
Because Tyranid blood isn't normal blood.
No, it's not. Tyranid ichor is highly acidic, alien, and vastly different from human or orc blood.
So does it still trigger the high?
Seems so. The visual trigger, the sheer volume of vital fluids rupturing across their carapaces, remains functionally identical.
Red is red, basically?
Or close enough for the engrams. The battlefield against Hive Fleet Arachne would be a sensory overload of catastrophic proportions.
I can't even imagine.
The Novokh phalanxes would be subjected to a literal tide of alien flesh, resulting in an unbroken, continuous loop of engrammatic activation.
Because there's just no break in the combat.
The text suggests that in these war zones, the Novokh enter a permanent, uninterrupted state of hyper-aggressive rage. They never reach the condition of sensory deprivation required to power down.
They just keep going.
They simply swing their blood scythes until their living metal joints seize from friction, or the acidic Tyranid blood melts through their protective plating.
They just swing until they literally fall apart.
Yes.
So what does this all mean for their long-term viability? It sounds like they are invincible as long as there is blood to spill. But the source material introduces a fourth campaign that exposes a critical, almost ironic vulnerability.
The Ferric Blight.
Yes, the Ferric Blight. On the world of Hollowfall, the Novokh engaged the forces of Mortarion, the Death Guard.
A very different kind of enemy.
And during this conflict, the living metal of the Novokh was actually infected by the Ferric Blight. Now, wait a minute. How does a biological, warp-infused disease of rust actually infect self-repairing living metal?
The Ferric Blight is a masterpiece of warp science tailored by Mortarion. It isn't a standard biological virus.
Okay, what is it then?
It is a scrap code epidemic intertwined with warp-borne bacteria.
Scrap code, so it's digital.
Yes, digital and biological. The necrodermis of a necron is highly advanced, utilizing microscopic scarabs and molecular reconstruction to repair damage instantly.
Right, they just knit back together.
The Ferric Blight attacks this very mechanism. The warp bacteria treats the necrodermis as a base iron to be oxidized, while the scrap code rewrites the self-repair protocols.
Oh, that's nasty.
It forces the living metal to rapidly accelerate its own oxidation process. The necrodermis essentially forgets how to be impervious and is instructed to rust.
Instructed to rust? That is a devastating irony. I mean, you have an entity of living metal that desperately craves organic flesh and the vitality of wet blood.
And their punishment is to rot.
Yeah. They are infected by a disease that aggressively rots their metal forms, mimicking the decay of the organic flesh they're so obsessed with.
It's perfectly poetic.
The text mentions it spread all the way to their tomb worlds, creating this visual horror where the proud crimson paint they use to simulate blood is overwritten by the dull, rotting orange of creeping rust.
It must be maddening for them.
It's an aesthetic humiliation that strikes at the very core of their engrammatic identity.
It is the ultimate structural and psychological defeat for a dynasty built on the permanence of their rituals.
Because they wanted to last forever.
They sought immortality to perfectly preserve the bloody traditions of their past,
Yeah.
relying on their invulnerable metal bodies to serve as eternal canvases.
And Mortarion just painted over it.
The ferric blight strips away that invulnerability.
Mm.
It proves that even in their soulless state, they are subject to the rot and decay of the universe.
Even robots get sick.
And practically speaking, it interrupts the sarcophagic mechanics of their weapons, clogging the microfractures of their blood scythes with rust, and dulling the optical sensors required to trigger their beloved frenzy.
It effectively suffocates their addiction. They can't see the blood, and their scythes can't drink it. It brings the entire deep dive full circle, honestly. When we look at the sum total of these excerpts, the ultimate horror of the Novokh dynasty isn't their star metal scythes, or their ability to blow up moons, or even their captive gods.
No, it's something much deeper.
The true horror is the terrifying reality that they are living metal that remembers the taste of blood.
That's the crux of it.
They aren't cold, rational machines calculating a localized victory. They are fundamentally twisted, tragic creatures carrying the savage madness of their old flesh into the cold eternity of their new existence.
Which is why the Crimson Rituals text is such a vital piece of the broader lore.
It really recontextualizes everything.
It is a profound study of how the ghost in the machine can completely override logic and self-preservation. It demonstrates that technological perfection and supposed immortality are entirely meaningless if the mind housed within the machine remains enslaved to its past traumas and rituals.
You can't out-engineer crazy.
Exactly. The Novokh are the ultimate cautionary tale. They are soulless entities forever chained to the echoes of their history, incapable of evolving past the bloody altars of their ancestors.
Which leaves us with one final, deeply unsettling thought for you to ponder based on everything we've unpacked today.
A chilling thought.
We've established that these soulless metal constructs are entirely hijacked by the memory of ancient blood rituals held in their engrams. It's a localized, hard-coded addiction they just cannot turn off.
Right.
So, what happens if they actually win? If the Novokh dynasty eventually succeeds in their campaigns, wiping out the Tyranids, the Orcs, and the Imperium, and they finally run out of organic enemies in the galaxy to slaughter, what happens when the visual stimulus disappears forever?
It's a fascinating scenario.
Will their corrupted engrams allow them to return to the Great Sleep, or will their programming eventually force them to turn their sanguophagic blades on each other, desperately trying to draw phantom blood from living metal just to simulate the frenzy one last time?